Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our webinar today. My name is Katie Kletlinger. I am a member outreach librarian for Lyrasis. I work in the Great in Mid-Atlantic regions. Today, I'm really happy to have Doug Peterson from Digital Transitions here to do a presentation on efficiencies in digitization. Before I came to Lyrasis, I was an archivist and digitizer, and I ran my own program. So I see a lot of familiar names on the screen from colleagues I've worked with in the past, and I see some new ones as well. It's always wonderful to talk to our Lyrasis members and then also talk to non-members to hear about what projects they're working on, some of the projects that have been successful in the past, and then also to share digitization war stories. So we're all in it together, which is wonderful. I'm going to provide you with a few housekeeping rules before we begin. If you look at the upper right-hand side of your screen, that is actually our area for technical support. If you're having any issues with your audio or seeing your screen, feel free to let us know. We have Donna Harnish, who is in our Atlanta office assisting us today. You are able to email her or call her directly at 800-999-8558, extension 2901. Also, we've already started using it this afternoon, but on the bottom right-hand side, you are going to see our area for chats and discussion. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put that information there. Our goal is to do a large question and answer session at the very end of this. So if you are able to hold on to your questions, that would be fantastic. But if it's pertinent and needed for you to understand the material, then feel free to put that information there. Now to give you an explanation or overview of how we started working at Lyrasis with digital transitions. So part of my job as a member outreach librarian is that I get to go out and meet with all of our members, learn where you're at, what you're working on, and then, share the products and services that are going to be able to assist you and help you become successful in what you're doing within your jobs. We actually were able to learn about digital transitions from our members. We have members who have had an excellent work relationship with the company, and that actually allowed for us to get to learn about them and what they provide. And now what we are doing is partnering with them on webinars, but also we have a special offer for Lyrasis members for discounts on their products. So I'm going to hand this over to Doug, who is an expert in the area of digitization, to talk about efficiencies in digitization. Doug, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Katie. I'm actually going to temporarily hand it over to Peter Siegel, who runs our division of cultural heritage, to give you a very brief overview about digital transitions for those of you who had not previously worked with us or know about us.
Thank you, Doug. Hi, Katie and everybody else. I thought I'd just chat for a couple seconds about the company. We're about 13 years old. We have offices both in New York as well as Los Angeles, with a large slew of support and sales executives around the country. And I just thought I'd just provide a little bit of information about us. We started about 13 years ago, and I was brought on about 10 years ago to start up the Division of Cultural Heritage. And just to let you know, I was on the other side of the screen, so to say. I worked in institutions for over 10 years running large imaging programs and had the Herculean task of figuring out ways to convert large holdings into electronic assets that should be disseminated to researchers as well as the public, as well as repurposing the materials for educational outreach and programming efforts for exhibitions, which is one of the reasons why we started to build our own equipment, because we found that most commodity-based camera systems or scanners that were available on the market didn't really deal with the requirements and heavy-duty use that organizations really required to properly convert their holdings. So that said, I figured I should probably hand this back over to Doug to kind of run through the efficiencies program. And I guess the last point I could say is, we really wanted to build systems that focused on what your business is really, which is the business of manufacturing great quality images for the larger public sphere as well as internal use. To that note, thank you.
All right, friends, this is Doug Peterson. I'm the product manager and head of R&D here at Digital Transitions. And today's presentation, Efficiency and Digitization, is going to have some bad news right off the bat. There is no silver bullet. But before we get to why there is no silver bullet and what we can do in regards of increasing efficiency, we have to first, I know this is a little bit boring, have to first define what efficiency is. So efficiency is the ratio of useful work produced compared to the total effort expended, or put more simply, your output versus input. And the reason we want to be more efficient is because if we're more efficient, we get more and better results out of the same effort. Unfortunately, there is not one silver bullet here. There is no one thing you can do to become more efficient. It is, in fact, a Mosaic approach. There's a whole lot of different things that can stop you from being efficient and a whole lot of different things you can do to increase your efficiency. And you have to look at that as a mosaic building up to a whole of efficiency. The mosaic is the operative word here because we divide some of the opportunities you have to increase efficiency into an acronym here of MOSAIC. That is measurement, doing it once and right, simultaneous, automate, invest, and collate. These are the topics we're going to talk about today in regards to how we view efficiency and digitization, and also how our clients have helped us understand their efficiency and digitization. So before we dive into that acronym and start going down the list of MOSAIC, I thought I'd take a quick opportunity to give you an example of the after, right, to help motivate you to sort of pay attention to the specifics of how you might get there. Let's talk about an institution that I believe kind of has gotten there, has spent a lot of time increasing the efficiency of their digitization, and has made very large leaps in just a few years. These numbers here are courtesy of Bethany Davis at University of Iowa, and they have done a variety of different things at University of Iowa to increase their efficiency. These are things we'll be talking about in depth as specifics. They integrate their conservation digitizations. They integrate the rehousing efforts they have with digitization. They collate zines by size before they place them into digitization, and they collate by collection subset, meaning that they digitize sets of collections based partly on how conducive that set is to digitization as a group. And finally, they've invested in DT hardware and software, as well as in new staff. Before some of these efforts were put in place, and these were all done across different years and different timelines, but before that, they were looking at essentially digitizing around 12 bound volumes per month using a legacy book scanner. That number grew after implementing all the things on the side there to around 33 per month. And that may or may not sound large to you, depending on the type of institution you run and what your collections look like. A lot of their collections are oversized, fragile, rare, and very technically difficult collections. Collections that are physically large and deteriorating. For example, they have a collection of scrapbooks. Do apologize if you're hearing some road noise there. Our office is located in Midtown Manhattan, and throughout most of each day it's actually pretty quiet, but it appears somebody is trying to drive an ambulance down the side here. So back to it, they have increased their digitization from 12 to 33 despite having complicated subject matter. But you also notice they've only increased from around 410 to 455 in unbound items because those are being done at their institution currently with a flatbed scanner. And so they really have not improved much in terms of efficiency there, pointing perhaps to the fact that a flatbed is itself the bottleneck of a process. The amount of time it takes to scan an item with a flatbed can itself be the cause of not being able to be efficient. So how did they do this? What parts of these investments, integrations, and collations, which of them contributed the most to the end result? Well, as it turns out, it's not an easy question to answer, and that kind of segues us to our first topic, which is measurement. Measurement is critical, but it's also very difficult. And so we want to cover some of the priorities that you might have in measuring your efficiency, and also some of the realistic realities of the difficulty of really getting in there fine-tuned. So if efficiency is input versus output, then we need to look at what kinds of inputs we have as a digitization program and what kind of outputs we have. And quite simply, that's money and time, and the quantity and quality of the product you're producing. And there are some obvious elements of all four of those, but there's also some that are easily missed. And so we wanted to cover some of those. When it comes to time, a very common way that people measure the amount of time they're spending in digitization is to measure project days. We had a collection of 400 magazines. It took us 8 project days to complete them. Or we had 200,000 slides, and it took us 3 months of work to digitize those. But easily missed or more hidden costs in time include downtime. That is, whether it's somebody is on vacation or a piece of equipment has broken and you don't yet have a replacement or a workaround, downtime matters. Downtime should be counted, as should time between projects. If you have in 1 week 2 projects, each of which take 2 days, but you have a day in between where you're sort of transitioning between the two, then it's probably a more fair assessment to say that each project took 2.5 days, because during the 5 days, you accomplished 2 projects. There's also the planning phases. These are often overlooked when people start to tally up the final cost of a project in time. They may omit the time it took them to plan and get the project off the ground. If it took you only a day to get the project off the ground and then took you 3 days to complete the project, that day still needs to be counted. As does training. And this is one where I think a lot of our institutions, especially the smaller institutions, I think sometimes neglect to include the time they take to train new staff. And this is especially true when you're using either student or volunteer labor, that if every quarter you have a new student come in, or whether it's every year or every quarter, if you have a new volunteer come in every week or every month, the time you take to spend with them training them to do their job needs to be accounted for when you start to do efficiency diagnosis. When you need to start tracking efficiency, you need to account for all time, not just those project days that you are actively working on a project. Next is money. It's very obvious to keep track of large equipment purchases and very important to keep track of the money spent on large equipment purchases, but it can often be overlooked that there is a fixed staff salary attribute here, as well as facilities and overhead. If, for example, some imaginary product was only $1 to buy and the staff was volunteering their time for free, but you needed to use the entire university library to facilitate that project, that's still a very large cost. The facilities themselves and the overhead imbued by them are costs that need to be considered. This is especially important when you look at insourcing versus outsourcing, that just because you're not putting money into the specific digitization project doesn't mean that there's not money being spent. There's always money being spent at an institution. So the question is how much and where. Then finally, on the output side, we have objects scanned. So we have a quantity of work produced. And the obvious unit there you often see cited is units produced in a project. 400 objects were scanned, 400 books were scanned, 800 magazines were scanned. Well, that is absolutely important. In fact, it's probably the most important attribute of quantity. But you also need to keep track of, at least in some way, how many purposes you're fulfilling, how many derivatives you're generating, how many end uses are being completed by virtue of that scan. So for example, if you produced only a thumbnail reference in order to help facilitate finding an object within your collection, that is one purpose. If you scanned an object at FAGI4 and are able to generate from that multiple derivatives, those are benefits, those are output from your project you need to keep track of. Likewise, related work being accomplished, and we'll look at this again later in simultaneous, work that is accomplished at the same time as the digitization needs to be counted into the tally of output. If during your digitization project you were able to, for example, remove staples in a conservation pretreatment or preparation stage, or you were able to accurately refile them and rehouse them in a better order than they were found in the collection, that is work that is being done, that is output that is being accomplished, and that counts towards efficiency. Then finally, quality. And the obvious element of quality you often see cited is it looks good. A lot of, especially smaller institutions, have not yet gotten on board with target-based FAGI compliance testing. And so you'll see, oh, they look pretty good. I had these sets of books scanned. The content is legible. The color looks good to me. Well, that is absolutely important. But it's easy to miss the output side of quality, which is that, are you meeting a specific FAGI compliance standard? Are you hitting FAGI 2-star or FAGI 3-star or hopefully FAGI 4-star? And even if you are you providing any form of proof for that? If you digitize a collection and the images themselves stand alone without any targets either before, after, or during the digitization, even if the quality is good, you don't have proof of that. Not proof that you need to hold up in court, but proof to somebody who's looking at this image 10 or 50 or 100 years from now to know that the image was scanned to a certain level. The next major topic here, moving on from measurement, is doing something once and right. Ideally, and pretty intuitively, you should touch an item in your collection as few times as possible, both because when you handle the collection, if you physically handle an item, you're creating wear and tear. Even if it's very minor, even if you're doing it very diligently, even if you're following best practices, every interaction with that object exerts wear and tear. And then secondly, it's just not efficient. If you can scan something once and right, that means scanning it to the highest possible level of quality. That is defined in the FADGI specifications as FADGI 4. If you're not familiar with FADGI, I would just literally Google the word FADGI. That is the Federal Agency Digitization Guidelines Initiative. And it's a document that lays out how to both set up for and then verify that you are producing a scan that represents the absolute best quality that can be achieved today. If you do that, then you can use those files to generate all sorts of derivatives. That one preservation scan can be used for a low-quality JPEG for the web. It can be used for a print catalog to highlight the collection in an exhibition form. You can use it for researchers, whether they're researching the content or the method of production or the history or provenance of that object. They can be used for that sort of intense research. And publication. They can be used should somebody in-house or externally want to publish that piece. The same is not true if you're not scanning at the highest quality. If you're scanning, for example, only for access quality at FADGI 2 or FADGI 3, you can't then take those and repurpose them to a higher quality use. They won't be suitable for research or for publication. They may be suitable for a low quality JPEG for the web, and the difficulty then becomes that you likely will need to rescan that at some point. If you can imagine, over the course of your institution's history, the last scan done will almost surely be done at FADGI 4, will be done at the highest possible quality. And so if you do it first at FADGI 2, and then 2 years later you start a new project and do it again at FADGI 3, and then do it again 2 years after that at FADGI 4, well, you've essentially wasted the first 2 passes, and that's very directly and obviously inefficient. Another way of combining, another way of increasing efficiency here is to do something once, meaning to do it simultaneous with other processes. It's very inefficient, for example, to first catalog a collection and then to rehouse it and then to digitize it. If possible, where practical, when it's able to be done, it's best to be able to combine those processes. So let's take a look at a process map and see how this works. Digitization itself is actually a pretty small part of the whole process an object goes through in order to be digitized or in order to be handled for any collection level operation. So you don't need to look at every one of these squares, but just generally speaking, you're looking at the broad beginning planning stages like assessing a collection, going through to planning and funding and approval, and then you need to pull the item from storage, you need to transport and prep it, you need to scan it, do the post-processing like cropping, metadata, forms of QC, and then return the item to storage. And here we notice a couple things. One is that if you just look at the insourcing and outsourcing, you can see one of the reasons why we've seen a large trend, even at smaller institutions, towards insourcing digitization. And that is the same work needs to be done, the same amount of work needs to be done when you outsource it as you would do insourcing it. But then there are additional steps added, like packing and shipping, unpacking and receiving at their end, them repacking and reshipping it to you, you receiving and unpacking it, as well as the fact that both you and your vendor will need to do QC. And at the end of the process, since an external entity has interacted with the collection, you'll need to survey that collection to make sure that all items were returned and they were returned in good condition. So in general, I think this kind of represents the give a man a fish and they will be hungry again tomorrow, but if you teach a man to fish, they can eat forever, eat for forever. It is best where possible to focus on the fact that scan and post, here in highlighted in yellow, are just a small part of that chain. And in fact, if you look at the types of steps before and after this, before and after the yellow, what you'll notice is that they share a lot in common with other types of projects like rehousing. So here's a comparison of the step-by-step, a potential step-by-step, every project is different, but a potential step-by-step for rehousing a collection or scanning a collection. And you notice that there's a lot of overlap. And so if it's possible for you to combine those two processes together, you can get rid of a lot of the redundant steps. And if you're doing less work and getting the same result, that is by definition more efficient. Now, we'd be the very first to tell you that this is not always possible, it's not always practical, it's not always the right decision. This webinar today, if you were looking for someone up on high to provide you infallible, perfect advice, there is no such thing in this area. Efficiency is about understanding where your costs are, understanding where your product or output are, and trying to find ways to reduce the cost or increase the output. So another way we do that is through automation. Automation is so important in digitization because there are so many redundant, recurrent, fairly annoying, shall we say, tasks. Things like cropping, things like naming, things like adding metadata. These are things that have to be done every single time. And if they have to be done manually, it takes up a lot of time, decreasing your efficiency. So here's a cartoon from or a webcomic from xkcd.com. It's one of my very favorite webcomics. XKCD lists here on the x-axis how often you do something, and then on the y-axis how much time you would be shaving off if you could automate it. And then in the square it tells you how much time it's worth to invest to automate that process. And what I'd point out here is that people very often focus on the things that take up a lot of time. Oh, I could save an hour if I did this. I could save a day if I did that. But if those things don't happen very frequently, they may not be worth automating. Where automation can really come in handy is when you're doing something a lot. So for example, look at the far top left square. If you're doing something and you can automate it and only save yourself 1 second, but you're doing it 50 times per day, then over the course of a 5-year project or a 5-year time horizon, you'd still be ahead of the game if you spent an entire day figuring out how to automate that process that only took 1 second. And if you look at something more like 5 seconds and you're doing it 500 times per day, well, now you're looking at 50 days worth of effort would still be worthwhile over the course of 5 years. And after that, it's gravy. So automation of things that happen frequently can still save you time and make you more efficient, even if it's not something that takes a lot of time each time you do it. So to look at this more in depth, to give hard numbers on this, let's take a look at the way that we would scan 100,000 photographic 35mm slides. There are 3 systems presented here. One is using a legacy film scanner. The middle one that's in yellow, that's represented by a camera, so they can instantly capture or instantly scan, but still using a traditional manual cropping mechanism, where you have to go to the screen, click a cursor, crop the thing, and then push OK or Enter or Save or something of that nature. And then finally, instant scan, auto crop. So that would be a DT system using DT's camera systems that are instant capture, as well as Phase 1 Capture 1 CH software, which provides auto crop. Let's take a look at how these things come to an endpoint. Well, if we have 100,000 slides on a legacy film scanner, a conservative estimate would be 3 minutes to capture per slide. Now, it's a fairly conservative number because if you were actually aiming for preservation grade quality, often film scanners were more in the range of 5 or even 10 minutes per scan, but let's give it a sort of the benefit of the doubt and pick one of the more conservative numbers there of 3 minutes. It's also scanning direct to TIFF, which makes it a little bit longer of a process than the other two, to open it up, to crop it, to deskew it, in other words, to make sure that it's perpendicular to the frame, and save it and then close it. That adds up to around 3 operational years, meaning for 3 years you'd come in each day, scan film, leave at the end of the day. If we if we increase the speed of capture from 3 minutes to 3 seconds, which is a pretty reasonable estimate for an instant capture system like our DT film scanning kit, if we can reduce that capture time to 3 seconds, then we've saved a lot of time. But we're still going to be spending 10 seconds per item to crop it, to deskew it. Maybe it would be a little less, maybe it would be a little bit more, depends on the computer and the operator, but I think that's a pretty reasonable guesstimate. Adding up those numbers, we have saved a lot of time. We have surely saved a lot of time compared to the legacy film scanner, going from 3 years down to 10 weeks. But now look at what happens if we can also automate the crop. And the crop is one of those things, like in this last slide, that you do over and over and over again, but doesn't ultimately take up that much time if you do it manually. But over the course of doing it 100,000 times actually adds up a huge amount of time. And so here, using the instant scan and the auto crop, which would be a feature of a DT system, we would be able to drop our operational time for that scanning of the 100,000 slides down to 3 weeks. Now, this is about efficiency, and efficiency has both the output and the input. So let's take a look at the costs involved in each of these, because for sure, a legacy film scanner is going to be less expensive. I put down here 5K. You'll see in the end it doesn't really matter if I marked it as 3K or 8K. There's different film scanners out there that could be reasonably cited to be a little bit more or a little less than this. It's all going to kind of come out in the wash. But if we're using 3 years of labor, I'm going to go ahead and rate that just as a ballpark at $100,000 a year, not necessarily because that's the straight salary cost, but that's the cost of the salary, plus benefits, plus overhead, plus your sort of generic markup within an institution for taking care of things like facility costs. So again, you could make this number a little higher or a little lower, but we're going to ballpark that at around $305,000 total. By switching to a more expensive camera system, say again, this could be a little bit more, a little bit less. We have systems that start as low as 10K and systems that go up to 100K. Let's just pick a number that's fairly common and expected, say 70K. But we're going to complete the work in 10 weeks. So our overhead and labor costs are going to be around 20K for a total of 90K. Now, it's not going to seem like we save much money here when we go to the auto crop, and that's true, but we have to remember two things. One is that we need to look at both the input and the output. So if the input was not that much less, but the output was in fact greater, that's still a large increase in efficiency. That said, it is less expensive because we are in fact spending less time on the project. Take a look at this though. If we do another project thereafter, and we already have the hardware, we already have either the legacy film scanner or the camera and the software, we don't have to spend that money again. When we do that project again, in the case of the instant system, we would be doing that project again, say in 4 total weeks, because we'd be done in 3 weeks and have a week to do organization and prep work on something else, and then start another 100,000 slides. Well, here's where the numbers really start to become profoundly different. Because we're not rebuying that equipment and we have built that capability, we've taught ourselves to fish, so to speak, we're now down to a difference of $3 per slide versus 7 cents per slide. And that, I think, should strike everyone as being a very large foundational change in efficiency. Finally, today we're going to look at collation. Collation can mean different things. It means putting like with like. Here we're talking about putting like objects in the digitization workflow at the same time. So here we have, for example, a total of 8 items being digitized. This is obviously a microcosm of a larger effort that might be 5 different kinds of objects and 50,000 objects each. But here let's just take a look at 8 objects. 4 slides represented in blue, 4 glass plates represented in green, and then processes required to get from one to the other. This is going to be different whether you're using a flatbed scanner or a commodity camera like Canon or Nikon or a specialized system like ours. There's going to be something you need to do in order to change from one type of object to the next. Some systems that is a little faster, some systems that's a little slower. The theory and the operational part of collation is true regardless. And that is, if in the first example, we do this in a collated way where we set up the camera, we set up the system to scan slides, and we do 4 slides in a row, and then we set it up to do glass plates and do 4 glass plates in a row, we have far fewer operations and a much more efficient workflow than if we do it in an uncollated manner. If we set up the camera for a slide, and then we set up the camera for a glass plate, and then we set up the camera for a slide, and then set up the camera for the glass plate, it can have a profoundly different impact on the totality of speed at which we're able to accomplish those same 8 objects. Remember, the output here is 8 objects. So efficiency-wise, if our output is the same, but our input takes longer, we're being less efficient. Now, is this possible? Is this practical? Not in every case. A great example, I think, that where this last example and this example sort of overlap and merge is to talk about having 2 systems side by side. It seems in many ways wasteful and inefficient, but for example, we have a client who's just come in recently asking about digitizing a very large collection of negatives in sleeves with notes on the sleeves. And they have many millions of these. And it might make a lot of sense intuitively to just use one system and switch back and forth between the two different types of imaging, the imaging of the film and the imaging of the sleeve with the note on it. But here we ran the numbers with them, and you can imagine two systems side by side, one set up to shoot sleeves with notes and one set up to shoot the negatives, and they open up the envelope that contains both, and they place the one on the one and the other on the other. And by doubling the amount of hardware, they don't double the speed, they greatly increase the speed at which they'll be able to get through that collection. And they also decrease the number of times they do these redundant steps of switching over, which means they also have a lower likelihood of making any mistakes or having any undue effort placed into that process. So that is collation. So we've talked about now at this point measuring, doing something once and right, simultaneous processes, automation, investment into physical hardware or software that will help you, and collation. So at this point, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some upcoming webinars we have, both with Lyrasis and DT, and then we're going to stop and do QC. So before we talk about the upcoming webinars, I just want to go ahead and remind you that your questions should go below and to the right. And let's talk now about the upcoming webinars. So DT will be doing a webinar on automatic FADG 4-star imaging with our new product, the IXG, and our new product, the DT Auto Column. That will be this Thursday, and you can sign up at dtdch.com. That is a free webinar. We are also arranging with Lyrasis to do a webinar on film scanning. That date has not yet been determined, but if you watch out for Lyrasis announcing it, by the way, feel free to jump in, Katie, if I'm wrong about the date not being determined yet, but that will be a webinar on film scanning with a camera. Yep. And so if you watch out for Lyrasis,
yes,
they will be
have
announcing
information
that
on
date.
that soon, and we will place it out on our website. We have an area on our website that is free events, so feel free to keep your eyes out for that. And then we'll also post announcements through our listservs.
Excellent. So I hope sincerely, for my own benefit as well as for everybody else's, that if you've had a question while we've been presenting this, that you will please type in that question at the bottom right. And so Katie and or Lyrasis, do you have any questions that have been submitted so far?
It looks like that we have someone typing down in the lower right-hand side right now. So while we're waiting, the one thing that I want to say, Doug, that I really took away from this and that I learned the hard way when I was doing my digitization program is the importance of doing it right the first time. Because heaven forbid you have to go back and redo something or you lose efficiency in that capacity. So I wanted to say thank you. Once and right is a very important thing to think about.
Right the first time. Yeah, and we've been now, as Peter mentioned, we've been around for a good amount of time now, 13 years going on 14. And I will say, at the end of the day, we are a commercial entity, but we are here because we're passionate about digitization, and we are proud and involved in the actual output of this. And so when we see an institution go through a long, expensive process of digitizing a collection or an entire collection or a subset of a collection, and they get done with that, and then they find out that just as they're wrapping up a 5-year effort to scan all of their X, that they're going to go back and do it again, either immediately or they're already looking for funding to do it again at a higher quality level. I got to tell you, it's kind of crushing, because you know the person who sat in that chair, the person who put their life's work into this, they spent day after day working on it, that, not to put too fine a point on it, it was basically immediately wasted by the requirement to go back and do it again better. So I brought back for QC, I brought back Peter Siegel as well from our company, so we'll be able to answer just about any question you have. I would also welcome any feedback on this presentation, any specific stories from anybody who's on the webinar who would like to chime in about something that they've done to improve their efficiency, or one of the points that really resonated with them, or something that you disagreed with. We would love to hear that feedback.
I would like to add one thing This is Peter Siegel talking. I would like to add one more thing to what you guys are talking about with regard to image quality. And I think as a company, we're very fortunate to have very good technology partners in terms of signal processing to make a great image, which is basically just software, our lens fabricators, as well as the digital back companies. They're all very impassioned about image quality, and they're very focused on making sure that the resulting images you're getting off these kind of systems are hold to a very high standard. So,
and that speaks to the quality side of the output. One story I didn't mention here that sort of resonates now that you talk about quality. One example of that I think was not explicitly stated was in this talk about quality and quantity. We have a lot of different clients digitizing for different reasons, and I think it's good anytime any institution or even commercial entity is involved in digitization and helps to get the world's collections digitized. But as an example of where I think there are pitfalls, the Google Books project, which is very well funded and extremely well run, and is being done as a contribution to the world of cultural heritage, they, I think, on this scale have balanced a little too heavily towards quantity when they're measuring their efficiency and efficacy. So if you look at, especially their first couple years of work, they balanced everything towards getting quantity, quantity, quantity. And having, I think, sacrificed a little bit on the quality side, there's some part of me that just kind of, I don't want to put too fine of a point on it, but wouldn't it have been great if that entire project had been done from day one at FADGI 4 quality? We may not have quite as many of the books digitized that Google had set out to do, but boy, we would never have to think about doing those books again. I think that's an example of where it would be great to have that efficiency measured in both the quantity as well as the quality. For institutions of cultural heritage, the quality has to be part of that equation.
All right, Doug, it looks like we do have a question. I'm going to read it out loud. Have you found that while a system can become very efficient by the statistics that you have shown, have you noticed, though, that human beings, the way they are, might slow down a bit because they have this extra time? Are they not machines, or have your stats clearly demonstrated exactly what you predict?
I'm so glad somebody brought this out. And again, any feedback like this or any violent dissent, as they used to say on the NPR show, we very, very much welcome, because this is absolutely a very good point. We have found over and over again that one of the best jokes at a client is to ask them if they were a Sudoku or a crossword player. If you're coming from a system that takes 2 or 3 minutes to scan, you have a lot of downtime, and there is something to be said for understanding the human component of this. I don't think that we as a company claim expertise in that. I will say that we have written up, we've collected stories from our clients into a guide that we call the Digitization Program Planning Guide. And one of the sections of that guide is quotes from our clients debating the questions of how do we deal with the human factor? How do we, for example, do we encourage music to be listened to? What kind of chairs do people sit in? What about a sit-stand desk? What about engaging those individuals in continuing education so that they feel engaged and part of the overall program? These are not areas that I claim or DT claims specific expertise in, but it is absolutely something that our clients deal with day to day. And in fact, Peter Siegel, who's standing right next to me, also, like Katie, ran a program and I think might have some things to say about this.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, running large imaging programs, we felt ultimately that staffing is always the most complex part of the program. And basically we noted that after about 6 hours of work, the operator running the equipment was no longer efficient in terms of both, I would say, producing a quality product and also an accurate product. I got to the point where the individual would make, either organic errors in the scan, make typographical errors.
I'm sorry, Peter, could you clarify organic error?
An organic error would be a hand in the way or something's in the way of the image. They just mentally got tired. So either they have to change their role for the day, or they would just not work more than 6 hours at any given time per day.
I would highlight 3 specific things that we've done with our systems that are related to this, I think amongst many. One is that the auto crop tool, part of the reason why we developed automatic cropping was because no one likes to crop. We can talk about efficiency and input and output all day long, and that is a big thing to consider, especially at the top-down level. But at the operator level, No one in the history of the world has ever come in on Monday morning saying, I can't wait to hand crop 3,000 images today. That is what I'm going to accomplish today, and I'm really glad, proud, and involved and engaged in it. So automatic cropping is one tool we added, partly for the efficiency, but partly because it's just not a task people like. Another thing we've done with our systems is we've tried to provide multiple different ways of physically handling the object and physically triggering the camera. Foot pedals, hand pedals, spending time actually thinking about the shape and location of those hand pedals, because if you're doing anything over and over again, it needs to be both comfortable and flexible so you're not doing the same thing over and over. And the third thing we've tried to do with our systems and with our training is to encourage institutions to trade off roles within a system. So for example, on film scanning, somebody might do the loading of the slides, someone else might do the scanning of the slides, and then halfway through the day switch, purely for the variety of it, because the human factor is very important. The human factor is so important in the fact that this chart here, we didn't really explain this chart, it was just used for eye candy, but this is from Don Williams of Image Science Associates, and it's a test of an institution over time and then a quality metric. We won't dive into the weeds of this except to say, if we look at right here, there seems to be, there's so much consistency between 0 and 20, and then 20 to 25, and then all of a sudden there's just this precipitous immediate drop in quality. And that drop in quality correlated to the Monday following a 3-day weekend. So you want to talk about the human factor. The Monday following a 3-day weekend might be a good day to have planning sessions or to clean out the facility or to do some form of alternative work. It may not be the right time to spend 8 hours scanning another collection. It's maybe not the time where everybody is as fully rested and is fully engaged and is fully back into the swing of things following a long weekend. Do we have additional questions, Katie? Or Katie, do you have an input on that given your experience?
Yes, I actually do. Thanks so much. No, everything that you said, and Peter, what you said, it really is exactly what I did for my operation. You know, I would have assigned projects that had to be done throughout the year, but then I would have my staff work on 2 projects, and I would do my best to make the second project something that they were interested in. It was a way to keep them motivated. I normally did an average of a 4-hour scanning window for my operation, and when I did that, I made sure that that staff was able to solely work on that project. They didn't have to answer the phone. We had our other reference staff working on that. And then also in regards to music, that actually was something that helped one of my staff members tremendously. You know, one day she was listening to Comedy Hour, the next day she was listening to pop music, but it kept her motivated and it kept her going. So what I did was really, I thought about the personality of my staff and I let them bring that out in the job. So that way they had a comfortable work environment. And ergonomic chairs, definitely. That one helped us tremendously.
Do we have additional questions?
It looks like we have a couple people typing. So we will see what they have to say.
Excellent. Then we'll wait for that. And in the meanwhile, maybe Katie, you could tell us other things that are going on around Lyrasis in the upcoming days or weeks.
Let me think. Now you put me on the spot here. I got to think of something witty. Something for our members that we do is we offer a training called Second Fridays. What we do is we pull in experts from the field. So if you're a Lyrasis member, and let's say there's something in the area of digitization that you would like to learn about that maybe you haven't seen or that you want to provide to your staff, feel free to let us know. We are always looking for topics and ideas. And then just to give you guys some ideas on the upcoming ones that we have a Second Friday series actually this Friday where we're going to be learning about museum exhibits from Delta. And then 2 weeks after that, we are going to be discussing 3D printing and robotics. So they're free events for members. Feel free to sign up and we'd love to see you there. And I do not think we have any more comments. I think people might have stopped typing.
Very good then, Katie. I will advance us back to the final slide to just say that if you have questions after the webinar, that DT is glad to take your questions at either info@dtdch.com or if you haven't already have a relationship with one of our sales team or one of our members here, feel free to email them directly. And of course, if you have questions for Lyrasis, if you email hannah.rosen@lyrasis.org, she will be able to direct your email to the appropriate individual within Lyrasis. You've got a big team over there, so she'll be able to help direct traffic. But please don't hesitate to reach out. We're in this because we're passionate. and we're in this because we like helping people. So from our side, that's all. Katie, any closing words?
Great. Actually, it looks like we have two more
Please.
questions that
Wow.
just came in. So it looks like Stacy is asking us, are there any plans for a message board or something similar that would allow digitizers to share tips and questions? Something that we do have is that we have a digital collaborative listserv. So if that's something that you're interested in joining, feel free to let us know. Doug, are there any
This
message boards or any information sharing
this is
tools that you offer
Peter
through digital
Siegel, and
transitions?
Digital Transition doesn't offer a kind of message service like that, but we do recommend one that's in the community called ImageMuse. ImageMuse, I'm not sure if this group knows about ImageMuse. It had its origins in the museum community because they wanted to standardize um, image capture in color for catalogs when film became outdated and digital sort of took over that market space. But recently, ImageMuse has opened itself up to lots of libraries and archives because you, as a group, you have a lot more professionals to talk to that share common concerns regarding image standards and could as well be compliancy to delivery systems like IIIF and so on and so forth. So it's actually grown quite large.
I don't want to speak out of turn on their behalf because this is a group and organization that we belong to and participate in, but we are not leadership on that community. So I hesitate to speak for them, but I think I'm comfortable sharing for them that although this list of institutions that participate certainly includes some prestigious, well-known, broadly admired institutions, they welcome participation from and applications to join from any kind of institution that is doing the work of cultural heritage digitization. As you see here, they consider themselves to be part of cultural heritage imaging, DAM, and publishing. And so regardless of what institution you belong to, even if your institution is not currently participating in ImageMuse, I would encourage you to reach out to them in order to join.
They also have a lot of discussions around photographic techniques. So if you're photographing tintypes, or you have a collection of glass plate negatives, or you have lantern slides that have both metadata that's handwritten on the outside as well as the image content. So you have the opportunity to talk to a lot of people in the community who actually are looking to solve certain problems that already exist. And it's an international organization, so I do think it's a worthwhile to look at them.
I would also throw out there both Lyrasis educational classes and events and our own classes and events. We do try to put on as many open houses, trainings, and certifications as we can. And that's another place that, of course, you're getting the training and the education. That's great. You're also able to network and be directly around those doing the same thing. And I'm very eager to tell you at any of the trainings that we run that on a good day of training, our training is the least important thing in the room, that you're learning from each other as much as you are from any of the class or topics that we're providing.
Something else that may be helpful for the group to know is that Lyrasis also has a resources page for digitization. So if you look there, you'll see some help, guidelines, tips, and things that you can use from other groups and organizations. And some of those may also have resource pages and chat groups. And it looks like we have one more question, if you gentlemen don't mind answering. It looks like we have one from Heather, and she is asking, yeah, I thought so too. She asked, have you found computer specs such as RAM and storage capacity can affect efficiency?
So as product manager here, we do have a document that we produce that is a good, better, best for computers being used specifically with our system. I would think that a lot of the same premises apply across a variety of different kinds of tools. Probably the most important to talk about in a context like this is GPU. And the reason I say it's the most important is because it is probably the least understood by most people starting up digitization programs, that in the last 5 years or so, more work is being done on the graphics card than on the CPU. And so if you're buying, whether it's a laptop or a desktop, If you spend more money to get a faster CPU, it will make things go faster. It will make operations complete quicker. But that's less important than the graphics card because we're putting so much more of the tools of today through the graphics card than the CPU. And the second main area would be disk speed. And it's especially important because on something like auto crop, when we looked at this graph talking about 1 second per auto crop, that is an accurate number, but that does depend on being able to access the automatic routine, being able to access the file, run the routine, and put it out again. So faster disk access speed, whether that's a SSD inside of the computer or a very fast external drive, that is something to be considered. But CPU, the one that tends to get the headlines, I would actually put third or fourth or fifth most important. So finally, I would say on speed and computer stuff, you really need to be thinking about efficiency-wise the human time versus computer time. For example, a very common workflow for us is to actually scan without cropping at the time and get through 10 or 20, 30,000 images, and then at the end of the day, select all of those and tell it to auto crop and leave. And yes, it may take 1 second per 30,000 slides. It may take 30,000 seconds, but that's happening while you're away from the desk. So that's computer time, not human time. I would much rather have 10 times the amount of time spent on something as long as I'm not involved, right? It's the human time that is really the valuable thing. Anything to add to that, Katie or Pete?
I don't.
Okay.
No,
well,
I
then
think
we
that
will
was
proceed back to that
fantastic.
last slide, just so everybody has that email address, those email addresses again, and we will say thank you so much for joining us on DT's side. Katie?
And thank you so much for joining us on the Lyrasis side. And if anyone has any further questions, feel free to contact us. We are always here, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
That's all, folks.